My name's Julie, and I am a co-parenting coach, and I focus mainly on giving individuals tools so that you can be the person you want to be the parent you want to be, regardless of the way in which your ex is showing up, right? Right, kind of standing in your own space. So that's sort of my focus and how I'm going to be coming at some of the topics we're talking about today.
Great, thanks. For those who don't know me, I'm Chloe O. I'm a certified divorce coach. I live in London, so not very close to Julie. But my job is similar to Julie, to try and keep things as peaceful as possible. My objective is really to help people divorce without starting a war, so that they can focus on building their new life rather than destroying the previous chapter. So it's really around trying to find better ways to communicate, to negotiate, and to set boundaries as everyone finds their footing in the new dynamic during the divorce, but also afterwards. So today, as Julie hinted, we're going to be talking about a specific situation that we know happens regularly in a lot of divorced couples. Is the other person, your ex, will use the children as a source of information. And they might be tempted to grill them and ask them a whole bunch of questions about you, instead of just asking you directly or inquiring through other means. They use the children to gather that information. And whether they're doing that just because they're curious or because they're trying to gather info, for a court case or whatever you've got going on, the feeling is horrible for the children either way, and for you as the co-parent as well. So I think we'll address those two bits.
Yeah.
Julie, do you want to kick off
so,
with the kids? Like how would you recommend?
Yeah, so let's give like an example, right? So let's say, for example, your kid comes home and they're like, and I'll just use the dad said that, you weren't supposed to do so and so, and he was asking, right? You send your kid to your ex's house, they start asking questions about things, and now your kid comes home to you kind of with like all these like questions, or maybe they're upset about these things. And now you're kind of in this position. And so, Chloe and I had discussed it, and I think there's two pieces here. It's how do you help your kids deal with this? And then really, what is the impact on you? And, where is this coming from for you? I think there's a third piece that maybe, is the first thing when these sorts of things happen, your first step is always to just give your ex the benefit of the doubt. Even if you think your ex is definitely doing it on purpose, you want to just kind of reach out and give them the chance by acknowledging, hey, look, please stop grilling our kids. And then, see what they do with that. So your first step is always like, give it a chance, give your ex the chance to like remedy and ratify what they're doing. But then, the second piece is, okay, how are your kids showing up? And I think the theme, and each month, almost every topic we talk about has the same kind of fundamental piece when you're dealing with your kids. And that is, you need to acknowledge what is the effect on your kids. Yeah. Just because it upsets you doesn't mean that it's upsetting your kids in the same way. So you want to acknowledge your kids' feelings, acknowledge, oh, that made you angry. Oh, that must have made you uncomfortable. It looks like that bothered you, X, Y, and Z. And then address it from there, not sort of imposing your own feelings on your child. So
yeah,
what are your thoughts on that?
Right. We mentioned that last time, but it makes a lot of sense. We have our own reaction. We might feel judged, we might feel, tracked, whatever the feeling might be that we have. The children will have a different feeling. And in a lot of cases, it'll relate to feeling like they have split loyalties. Like, they can tell it's not quite right that they're being asked that. If anything, it just highlights that there's bad communication between their parents, which makes them, feel very uncomfortable. So I think, as you said, Julie, don't show your feelings and don't assume that they're feeling the way you are. I think that the other thing that's really tempting is to do the same, or to also be exploring. And let's be honest, we're all curious. After a divorce, you want to know how your ex is doing, how fast they've moved on, etc. But it's really important to keep control of that need and to find another way of fulfilling it. The kids should never be made to feel like they're stuck in the middle, and that's really what we're trying to avoid here. So I'd say, it's not about addressing the topic that the kids have been grilled on. It's really about addressing their feelings. How did that make them feel? How can they deal with that in the future? And teaching them how to set boundaries, for not just in this context, in general. If somebody's asking them questions that are making them uncomfortable, that they learn to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable answering this. It makes me feel like I'm stuck in the middle, or whatever it makes them feel. But that they feel comfortable expressing that, and that it's okay to say no if they don't think it's right to be having that conversation.
Yeah.
Did you have any
Absolutely.
thoughts
I
on
think
that?
it's looking at it as an opportunity, right? Like, obviously, I think, and we're going to kind of get to the second piece. I think the bigger issue when we're dealing with your ex grilling your kids is the impact it has on you and the individual. I think this is a great opportunity to kind of have your kids, right, teach them or figure out if they're able to set boundaries, kind of, guide them a little bit. Like, maybe you don't have to answer those kinds of questions, and here's something you can say instead. And helping come up with something like that. So yeah, I think giving them the opportunity, or using this as an opportunity to help your kids set some boundaries.
Yeah.
And I know that in some instances that's going to be very hard, depending on who your ex is and the way in which they interact with your kids.
And the
But
age of
that's a very
the
great
kid as
first
well.
step.
Yeah.
Yes, and the nature of absolutely, yeah, the age of the kid. Um, so I think that what we're kind of both saying, it's like when it comes to your ex grilling your kids and asking questions about you, your first deal, the first step with your kids is just acknowledge how they're feeling. It's totally normal for them to feel angry, for them to feel irritated, for them to feel like uncomfortable, or for them to not care at all. Maybe they really don't care. That's also normal. The second thing to do is to potentially give them a possible response, like a script, and something that they can practice saying in response to when those questions come up, so that they don't necessarily have to answer things they're not comfortable with.
And
So I
I'd
think
say,
those are the two key pieces.
yeah, sorry, I was just going to add to that. I'd say that it would be good to try and keep that advice as generic as possible, so it isn't personal against their dad in your example, that you're not telling them how to address a situation specifically with their dad. You're teaching them a life skill around being
Good
able
point.
to
Very good point.
questions that are uncomfortable, because you don't want to find yourself antagonizing the father and in a way being just as harmful to the children. So it's not about getting your point across, or bad mouthing your ex, or telling your children to be disrespectful to their father. It's really about trying to teach them that they have the right to accept or refuse to engage in a conversation, and then there's something that they don't feel comfortable with, it's okay to say, I'm not comfortable with that. You have to do it in a polite way, especially when it's with an adult, and in a constructive way. But we can, as you say, teach them some phrases like that they can use when they feel that they're in that situation that they just don't really like.
Yeah. I think, Chloe, that's such an important point, because the last thing you want is for them to go into a situation with your ex, and they're going, Mom told me to tell you when you asked me questions to say
Yeah.
this, and now you've created, right, a different kind of conflict. And you're right, that's not what we're saying, or certainly not right. That's not going to be as effective as kind of coming up with the life lesson generically. Great point. I think really important. Yeah.
We forgot to say at the start, but of course, feel free, all of you, to put any questions you may have in the chat. Anything that we're addressing that you want to clarify or more information about, anything that you want us to address that we haven't picked up on, feel free to stick it in there. And of course, you can always contact either Julie or myself afterwards if you want to have a free call to just talk about your situation in private, and address the issues that you're facing.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the sorry?
Yes. So how do we deal with it? How do you deal with it for yourself,
Yeah.
right? Because no one really wants to feel invaded like that. And then you feel kind of this weird thing with your kids, like now, like you're gonna, you want them to you don't want them to keep secret. It just gets really complicated when your ex starts asking questions about you, especially depending on the nature of the questions.
Yeah.
So Chloe, any kind of initial thoughts?
I mean, I'd say the first thing is that you need to acknowledge that highlights that there's some kind of communication that's not happening that might need to. It also depends what your ex is grilling them about. If they're trying to find out if you got a new relationship or how much you're spending on this or that, those are things that are completely fair to call off as off limits for them to be asking about, because you now have separate lives. You communicate when it comes to the children, but they have no right to know about your personal life and about your spending. So
Absolutely.
if those kind of topics, you might be stricter about it. But if it's just that they're trying to understand, where are you guys going on holiday next week? And, what activities did mommy sign you up for? Those kind of things. That's actually stuff that they should know. And so if they're asking those questions to the children, is that they aren't getting the right information from you. And that's a learning, I think, for the parent who's, kind of caught in the middle of it all, to try and communicate better and find a way of sharing that information in a way that allows the other person to not go to the children, but come straight to them. And, it could be a
Absolutely.
big
Yeah.
call that they put in place to talk about the kids and
Hmm.
what's going on, whatever it might be. So I think we have to kind of make that distinction. I don't know if you had that in mind as well, in terms of
I
those two
think that
different.
was a brilliant distinction, right? It's like, it depends on what it is, right? So if your ex is asking your kids questions about your personal life, right, then you don't really need to be addressing that. You want
Yeah.
to address that with your kids, kind of like draw your, well, I think the difference between them asking questions about your personal life and asking questions about things that are relevant to the kids. And if it's relevant to the kids, even if they're asking it because they're trying to like poke around and dig and get some dirt on you, I think this is where it's really important that you feel super confident in the way in which you're showing up as a parent, so that they can ask all the questions they want and, like, who cares?
Yeah.
Right? So I had a client who liked to have some wine, right? Like, genuinely, just like, no, not like an issue with wine, but like her ex was using, FaceTime calls with their kids to like spot wine bottles in the back of the room, and, oh, that means you're an alcoholic and all these things. Or, did you go on a trip and was mommy drinking, and all these things. And ultimately, like, there was no evidence of this woman having any sorts of issues with alcohol. It was just something her ex was using. And so where we want to address those types of grilling is internally. You have to get confident with your own choices. And she had to get confident with the fact that, like, she's an adult woman. She's entitled to have a glass of wine here and there if she wants. And when she was feeling confident about her choices, it didn't matter what her ex had to say about it. Blah, 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 blah. And that's really where you want to get. However, I think, to your point, Chloe, is, let's say your ex is asking the kids questions like, where were you? Who was with you? Like, what's going on? Even if your ex is being pokey and like trying to, like, get some
Yeah.
dirt, I think it's
Yeah.
still appropriate to send a message, say, I heard you had some questions. Here's a list of what's going on.
Yeah.
And you just kind of like, easy breezy, here you
Yeah.
go. Because, yeah, they are entitled to it. And then that way you've covered your bases. And hopefully your ex really is just coming from a place of like feeling out of the loop and wanting to have some information, and they're not being that spiteful kind of, but I think either way, the strategy is the same.
Yeah, I
So
agree. I
those
think
are some,
it works either way, because you're telling them, if you have a question, come to me.
yes,
And then
yeah,
if it's a question that's inappropriate, then you put in your boundary, say, I'm sorry, but that's not none of your
right,
business.
yes.
If it's a
And
question that's
please
appropriate,
refrain from
great.
asking the kids. And I think
Yes.
it's important to note, you do want to tell your ex that, I understand that you have some questions. I want you to understand it's not appropriate, or here's the information you need. And you do want to address your ex and give them the chance to let them know, right?
Yeah.
But understand that's not in your control. Your ex grilling, even if a court says in your papers, stop grilling the kids, who's standing there and monitoring that? Really, you can take some documentation. So just keep in mind in this situation, and I think this is also a theme for our calls, is really keeping in mind what's in your control with your ex and what's not.
Yeah.
And this kind of thing is one of those things, unless it's super, super like egregious, you really can't control your ex from kind of like getting into your business.
Yeah.
You can help your kids, and then you can sort of like internally get comfortable with it.
And I think it's what we usually say, right? You want to hold steady. It doesn't matter what the other person's doing, because, as you say, you can't control what they're doing. But if you're steady and you're parenting, you're, giving your best, you're trying to support the children through whatever damage the other person's having on, doing on them, to them, or with anything that's happening in their lives, that's all you can do. So you're there for your kids. You're going to help them, open up, express any feelings this is creating, and be aware that it is affecting them. and you're going to try as much as possible to deal with it offline with your ex, accepting, I think, the big lesson here is that there are some topics that are for adults and some that are involve the children.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to be very careful in a divorce. It's very tempting, especially for people who are remain alone with the kids, because they lose that kind of partner they used to speak to. And you tend to rely and share a lot with your children, and it's a very natural tendency to overshare and to involve them
Right.
in the divorce conversation, in the misbehaviors, etc. And so you're actually putting them in the middle by doing that. So by trying to keep adult conversations separate, not in front of the kids, not involving them in any way, there are conversations that need to happen among adults. And
Mm-hmm.
having that boundary very clearly defined with your ex, again, they may or may not respect it, but you can clearly say adult matters that we as co-parents need to address as a team. Hopefully we are matters that we do not involve the children in. If we
Mm-hmm.
have to tell them something, then we can tell them together if need be, or individually. But the decision making, the information gathering, that all needs to happen in that adult sphere that the children aren't privy to. And I think that's very important. It's very hard for a lot of people to hold that boundary, but it really is the best way to keep the kids
Absolutely.
safe.
Yeah. Yeah. I think holding boundaries is, that's everything. It is really challenging. It's challenging to figure out what the boundary is. It's hard to figure out, sometimes ways to hold on to it, what that looks like. And I think that's where you and I come in. We can really help you figure out what those boundaries look like for you, and how to make them effective and how to implement them in your, specific instance, in your specific way. Um, And I think, I don't know if there's any questions. Is anyone, who's on the call dealing with this issue? Anyone have like an ex who's just constantly, poking at your kids and asking them questions? The other thing that came to mind about this is, I think kids generally don't really no one likes being interrogated.
No.
That same feeling that you have of like, especially so if your ex is interrogating your kids with the intention of digging dirt, that a person is gonna feel that. They're gonna internalize that, right? As opposed to they're just kind of like asking out of curiosity in general. Like that's gonna feel differently. You also have to trust that your kids are people. They're not gonna like that. And over time, they're gonna also develop their own coping strategies for getting out of conversations like that. I have a lot of clients where this happens, and over time, there's really very few kids that want to be interrogated like that. Um, yeah, your ex refuses to discuss children matters with me at all. I think, in those instances, so the question is, my ex refuses to discuss or the comment was, my ex refuses to discuss children matters with me at all. And it's really frustrating. And you're right, because I think in those instances too, it's like, that's another one where even if a court like mandates that you collaborate, getting somebody to actually like say the words, and there's all sorts of games people can play. Really, really frustrating. And I think sometimes in those instances, learning how to communicate with your child or getting your child to learn how to express themselves over time so you can get some information, and that can get really tricky. So yeah, that's really, really frustrating situation.
It's
Chloe,
hard.
any thoughts from you?
Co-parent. It sounds like that's the situation. You're actively trying to co-parent with the other person, and they're basically not playing ball. I mean, there are couples that succeed in parallel parenting, and that
Mhm.
means you're just both doing your own parenting individually. In practice, I think it's quite difficult to completely not discuss children matters, because there's going to be some impact on both lives. They're not, completely
Yeah,
independent streams. So I think it can be quite challenging in that respect. But there are
but
some things again
possible.
that you can't
But
hold.
possible. Yeah,
It's
you
an option.
can raise your
You can't
child.
hold it
Yeah,
up. Yeah.
that's awesome that you have that and you're helping your kid. And again, it's an opportunity, right? If your son, I always say, like, if they can learn, and unfortunately, you don't want them to have to learn in in really tough environments, but if they can, and you are there giving them some, really great tools, think about what that's going to prepare them for and give them opportunities that not every child has,
Yeah.
right? That's going to be some skills and tools that not every kid has had, circumstances to develop them in. So, everything that you're doing is really, really just, investing in your kids. So that's really wonderful.
I think all of this is
And
making me think of a slightly related theme, which is, the fact that when couples split up, especially in the early days, they remain curious about each other. And there is somewhat of a unspoken competition around, who starts dating again or first, or, who, I don't know, has the nicer house, or who seems to be
progressing
moving on.
faster, yeah, getting over it quicker, right?
So you have to accept to a certain degree that that's kind of human nature. And I think even the best of, the parents with the best of intentions will have that temptation to inquire a little bit about the new girlfriend that they
Exactly.
met, or, that.
It doesn't always come from an evil place. Sometimes it's
Yeah.
just naturally human. And I think too, that goes back to the point of internally getting really confident with where you're at if you're single, because that's just what's best for you right now, or where things are at for you right now, as opposed to if you're in a relationship, like wherever you are in life, just owning that and feeling good about it. And once you're in that place, it's very difficult for anyone, including your ex, to, like, who cares if they don't like,
Yeah.
like if you feel good about it, it really doesn't matter where other people are at.
But I
And
see
that's
that
really the
a lot.
most powerful.
Yeah, a lot of people, even during the divorce, they've consciously, I work with a lot of people who have made the decision for some reason. So they come to me when they've decided to divorce. So they're the decision maker, but they've made that decision. They are confident about their decision, yet they have a hard time moving away from that duo and that dynamic of
Yes, yes,
working with their ex and
absolutely.
being intertwined. And so they'll say things like, oh, I need to check with my ex, or oh, I wonder what he's doing, or what he or she is thinking about them.
Yes,
And
absolutely. It's like
it's
natural, like habit.
natural. But then the thing is, that's when you need to start breaking those bonds. Actually, even within the negotiation, when you're trying to negotiate your settlement, at that stage, it's no longer about your ex. It's not about whether they win or lose or what they get. It's about what you need to be able to move on to with your life. And so you already need to start
Yes.
shifting your
Shifting your
mindset.
focus to you. And I think what you're
Yeah.
saying, and I think, at the same time, it's not like a light switch,
You know,
right? It takes time,
the
and
problem,
it's natural that it may take you a little bit of, absolutely. Sometimes it's,
especially if you've been married
yep, but
a long
that's the
time.
goal. And yeah. So I
But it
think with
is,
respect to just all of these things, I think the themes that we keep, going back to is, when it comes to co-parenting, as much as everything sort of says you have to collaborate, you want to communicate with your ex, all these things, like when you have some of these conflicts and these difficult situations, usually your best bet is to turn your focus away from your ex and just turn it on yourself and your kids. Not easy, but that's sort of the theme of what we've been saying each month. Like, make it about you, make it about your kids, and you include your ex where your ex is willing to show up in a positive way. And you do your best to include them, but we don't prioritize that.
have to
So,
move on, right? Because it's your
mhm,
life. It's no longer your life, your combined life. It's your life as an individual.
that's right.
That's what you're focused on. It doesn't matter what the other
Doesn't
is doing, how fast they
matter.
want. No, it's irrelevant because now your life is yours. And as you
Mhm.
say, it's a process, and you've lived with somebody for years and years. It's hard to not give a hoot overnight, about what's going on in their life and what they think about different situations. But that's where you're heading. And at some point, after a few years of after divorce, you get to a point where your life is entirely yours. And it may be that a lot of your friends don't even know your ex, and that you've changed jobs, and so you never worked in this job when you were in a relationship, and so suddenly your life is completely yours. It's completely separate from whatever you had in your marriage. It's just a process that needs to happen.
100%. Yeah. There was this quote that's coming to mind, and it was like, there was a time in which being divorced was the most important thing about me, and now it's not.
There you go.
And it was like, yeah, when you're in it, it's like you're going through it, but we're moving towards this point where it just is not, the person just doesn't matter. And that goes for when they're grilling your kids. Like, give your kids the tool, but let them do what they're gonna do. Like, whatever. You work on your relationship, which, Rosie, that it sounds like that's what you're doing in your case. So I give you kudos for that. Any questions? I don't know if I think we have a couple of people still on. Any questions or comments? Or Chloe, any final thoughts from you?
I think we've covered a lot. I'm looking at my notes. Um, Yeah, I think, there's a lot of healthy mechanisms you can put in place, assuming your ex is a fairly reasonable person. Thinking about ways in which you can make sure that the information is being shared. Think about parent-teacher meetings. Can you arrange them at times, check with each other and find a time where you can both attend? Doctor's appointments, those kind of things as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Getting yourself the access
And, and
that you need, not having
I
to
know
rely
couples.
on them.
Yeah, and there's couples who have a weekly coffee. It doesn't mean they're best friends. It doesn't mean they particularly enjoy each other's company. But if they're co-parenting, it gives them a chance to talk about the kids, and they can set whatever boundaries. It can be just a chat, or it could be just to talk about the kids, and we're running through a
Mhm.
list of decisions that need to be made.
Yeah,
But depending, on what you want to get out of it, you can arrange in different ways. It can be a weekly email. If you're the parent who has the children most of the time, and you want to make sure the other one knows what's going on, but you don't really want to talk to them, it's just an email. Hey, Joe started football. Jane has been doing clarinet, but now decides she wants to do guitar. And
yeah,
on holiday, we'll be
yeah,
going there. And you just send that information by email. Keep it factual, keep it unemotional, and as brief as you can. And that's it. But the point is to try and anticipate the requests from the other person and to try and share that information, because
yeah.
the reality is you're both taking care of these children. You both need to be involved.
Yeah. I mean, I think just as a, with stuff like that, even if your ex is not willing to do that and you're trying to engage, like you put the energy you want to have in that relationship. So like, even if it's better for your kid and it's better for your relationship to give them the updates, you give them the updates.
Yeah.
If they don't give you the updates, they're choosing, right? And that kind of goes for this. If you have things that you want to share with your ex so that they're in the loop for your kid, because that's going to be better for your kid, then you update them. If they don't want to update you and there's not much you can do about that, or, depending on the situation, there might be things you can do, but that doesn't determine the kind of co-parent you're going to be. You're going to be the kind of parent you're going to be regardless of whether they choose to
Yeah.
show up in that
You
way
stick
or
to your
not.
values.
Stick
So
to your
if
values.
you have
Absolutely.
the most, it might be that it sucks, but it's on you to share some information, and more information
Mhm.
the other way around. If you're the one going to parent teacher meetings, you can send notes across. If you think it's important for the other parent, which it usually is, for them to know how their kid is doing
Right.
academically,
Right,
share
that's right.
notes.
And that's the
It's
idea
not
of
hard.
keeping it child focused,
Yeah.
is you're making every decision in the best interest of your child, regardless of whether your ex makes that decision or not.
Yeah.
We don't do tit for tat. We never do that. So I think this is a great example of, or what you shared about that calendar is a great example. If that's a good tool for you, do it. If your
Yeah.
ex wants to get on board, awesome. If they don't, it's still going to be better for your kid ultimately, and
Yeah.
you still get
Exactly.
to be the kind of parent you choose to be. Yeah,
Yeah. You may not get a
cool.
response. You may never get a thank you,
You
but you're
may
doing
never
what's
get a thank
good
you,
for.
may never get a response, but absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's the key to, same thing with that your ex grilling, if your ex is grilling the kids about your personal life, and you don't go around now and turn around and do the same thing. Go, oh, well, then tell me about, mom or dad. You stick and stand into the, exactly what we're saying, stay authentic to your values as a co-parent, always in all ways.
I think that's a key in life anyway, but
Yeah,
especially
that's
in a
right.
situation conflictual,
Yes, this is one that can be
want to be
challenging to stay. Yeah,
the best of yourself. Yeah.
for sure. All right. So I know a couple of people just joined. Any questions from anybody before we sign off? All right. I think that's everyone. All
Thank
right,
you.
Chloe. So thank you so much, and I will see
Thank
you. We'll see
you.
you guys next month.
Take care, everyone. Bye.